The morning my father died, the hospital room smelled like antiseptic and something else, something I could never quite name but would forever associate with loss. It was a sharp, clinical scent that burned the inside of my nostrils and made my eyes water, though I told myself it was just the smell and not the grief clawing its way up my throat. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with a persistent buzz that seemed to drill into my skull, and the temperature in that room felt wrong, too cold for a place where someone was supposed to be taking their last breaths, too sterile for something so profoundly human. My mother sat in the chair closest to the bed, her hand wrapped around my father's, and I watched as her thumb traced small circles on his papery skin. She had been doing that for hours, maybe days. I had lost track of time somewhere between the initial phone call and this moment. My sister Rebecca stood on the other side of the bed, her face pale and drawn, dark circles under her eyes that made her look 10 years older than her 32 years. I was 35, the older sibling, the one who was supposed to hold everything together, but I felt like I was coming apart at the seams. The heart monitor beat steadily, a rhythm that had become the soundtrack to our vigil, and then it began to slow. The beats stretched further apart, each one feeling like an eternity, and I found myself holding my breath, as if I could somehow will the next beat to come faster. My father's chest rose and fell with increasing difficulty, each breath a labored wheeze that rattled in his lungs. The sound was wet and thick, and it made my stomach turn. My mother leaned forward, bringing her face close to his, and whispered something I could not hear. Her voice was so soft, so intimate, that it felt wrong to try to listen. Whatever she said made my father's eyes flutter open for just a moment, cloudy and unfocused, but searching for her face. His lips moved, forming words that never made it past his throat, and then his hand tightened around hers one last time before going slack. The final beat stretched into a single, endless tone, and a nurse I had not noticed entering the room reached over and silenced it. The sudden quiet was deafening, more oppressive than the noise had been. My ears rang with the absence of sound, and I realized I was still holding my breath. I let it out in a shaky exhale that sounded too loud in the stillness. Rebecca made a sound, something between a sob and a gasp, and I moved around the bed to put my arm around her shoulders. She was trembling, her whole body shaking like a leaf in a storm, and I could feel the dampness of her tears soaking through my shirt. My mother had not moved. She sat perfectly still, her hand still holding my father's, her eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. There was something in her expression I could not read, something that was not quite grief, or at least not only grief. The nurse, a woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a tight bun, touched my mother's shoulder gently. "Your husband is at peace now," she said, her voice practiced in the art of delivering comfort to the bereaved. My mother nodded slowly, but she did not look away from my father's face. She brought his hand to her lips and kissed his knuckles, and I saw her shoulders begin to shake with silent sobs. We stayed in that room for another hour, none of us quite ready to leave, to make his death real by walking away. The hospital staff moved around us with quiet efficiency, respectful of our grief but needing to do their jobs. Eventually, a doctor came in, the same one who had been treating my father for the past 3 months, and he spoke to us in low, gentle tones about what would happen next. There were forms to sign, arrangements to be made, decisions that needed our attention even though all I wanted to do was crawl into bed and sleep for a year. My mother finally released my father's hand and stood up, her movements stiff and mechanical, like a puppet whose strings were being pulled by someone else. She was 68 years old, but in that moment she looked ancient, her face carved with lines of sorrow that seemed to have appeared overnight. Rebecca and I flanked her as we walked out of the hospital, supporting her weight between us, and I noticed how small she felt, how fragile, as if she might crumble to dust at any moment. The parking lot was bathed in harsh afternoon sunlight that felt like an assault after the dim hospital room. I squinted against the brightness, my eyes struggling to adjust, and the heat hit me like a physical force. It was late August, the kind of oppressive, humid heat that made the air feel thick enough to chew, and sweat immediately began to prickle along my hairline. The contrast between the frigid hospital and the sweltering outdoors was jarring, disorienting, and I felt a wave of nausea roll through me. We drove home in silence, my mother in the passenger seat of my car, Rebecca following behind us in her own vehicle. I kept glancing over at my mother, watching her stare out the window at the passing scenery with blank eyes. Her hands were folded in her lap, perfectly still, and I wondered what she was thinking, what she was feeling. They had been married for 43 years, my parents, high school sweethearts who had built a life together that seemed, from the outside at least, happy and stable. Our family home sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, a two-story colonial with white siding and black shutters that my parents had bought when I was 5 years old. The lawn was neatly trimmed, the flower beds my mother tended with such care were bursting with late summer blooms, and everything looked exactly as it always had. But it felt different now, knowing my father would never walk through that front door again, never sit in his favorite chair in the living room, never call out "Honey, I'm home" when he returned from work. Inside, the house was cool and dim, the curtains drawn against the afternoon heat. It smelled like home, that indefinable combination of my mother's lavender sachets, old books, and the lemon polish she used on the furniture. But underneath it all was a staleness, the smell of a house that had been closed up and waiting, holding its breath for news that had finally come. Rebecca made tea, because that is what people do in moments of crisis. They make tea, as if hot liquid in a cup could somehow fix the unfixable. We sat around the kitchen table, the same table where we had eaten countless family dinners, where I had done my homework as a child, where we had celebrated birthdays and holidays and all the small, ordinary moments that make up a life. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by the clink of spoons against ceramic and the occasional sniffle from Rebecca. "Mom," I said finally, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet, "we need to talk about the arrangements. The funeral, the obituary, all of that. I know it is hard, but we need to start making decisions." My mother looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy, and nodded slowly. She took a sip of her tea, wincing slightly as if it burned her tongue, and set the cup down with a trembling hand. "Your father had everything planned out," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. "He made all the arrangements months ago, when he first got the diagnosis. He did not want us to have to worry about it. There is a folder in his office, in the filing cabinet, with all the information. The funeral home he wanted, the cemetery plot he purchased, even the music he wanted played at the service. He thought of everything." I felt a lump form in my throat at the thought of my father, sick and dying, taking the time to plan his own funeral so we would not have to. It was so like him, always trying to take care of us, to make things easier, even in death. Rebecca was crying again, silent tears streaming down her face, and I reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "I will go get the folder," I said, pushing back from the table and standing up. My legs felt unsteady, as if I had forgotten how to walk properly, and I had to grip the back of the chair for a moment to steady myself. My father's office was on the second floor, a small room at the end of the hallway that had always been his sanctuary. Growing up, we had known not to disturb him when the door was closed, that this was his space where he worked and thought and occasionally hid from the chaos of family life. The door was ajar, and I pushed it open slowly, half expecting to see him sitting at his desk, reading glasses perched on his nose, papers spread out in front of him. But the room was empty, of course it was empty, and the desk was neat and clear, as if he had tidied up before leaving for the hospital that final time. The air in the office smelled like him, like the cologne he wore and the leather of his chair and old paper, and I had to pause in the doorway to collect myself. The filing cabinet stood against the far wall, a battered metal thing that had been with my father since his first job out of college. I crossed the room and pulled open the top drawer, my fingers trailing over the neatly labeled folders until I found the one marked estate planning. I pulled it out and was surprised by how thick it was, how heavy. My father had been thorough, that much was clear. I carried the folder back downstairs, feeling its weight in my hands like a physical manifestation of responsibility. My mother and Rebecca looked up as I entered the kitchen, and I set the folder on the table between us. For a moment, none of us moved to open it, as if doing so would make everything too real, too final. Finally, I flipped open the cover and began sorting through the contents. There were papers from the funeral home, a copy of the deed to the cemetery plots, a list of people to notify, a draft of an obituary my father had written himself. Reading his words, seeing his assessment of his own life reduced to a few paragraphs, made my chest ache. He had been a good man, my father, a high school history teacher who had touched countless lives over his 35-year career. He had been patient and kind, with a dry sense of humor that could make you laugh even when you did not want to. Underneath the funeral arrangements, I found a copy of his will. It was a standard document, or at least it looked standard to my untrained eye, prepared by a lawyer and properly notarized. I skimmed through it, noting that everything was to be left to my mother, with the understanding that upon her death, Rebecca and I would split everything equally. It was straightforward, uncomplicated, exactly what I would have expected. "This all seems pretty clear," I said, looking up at my mother. "We can start making calls tomorrow, let people know about the service. Is there anything else we need to know about, any other accounts or documents we should be aware of?" My mother's face did an odd thing, a flicker of something that might have been panic or fear or guilt, I could not tell. It passed so quickly I almost thought I had imagined it, and when she spoke, her voice was steady. "No," she said, "that should be everything. Your father was very organized. He made sure everything was in order." She reached for her tea again, and I noticed her hand was shaking more than before. Rebecca was reading through the obituary draft, tears dripping onto the paper, and she did not seem to notice our mother's discomfort. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls and arrangements and visitors. The house filled with casseroles and flowers and well-meaning people who did not know what to say but felt compelled to say something anyway. "I am so sorry for your loss," they would murmur, and I would nod and thank them and accept their hugs, all while feeling like I was watching everything from a great distance, like I was not quite present in my own body. The funeral was on a Thursday, a gray, drizzly day that seemed appropriate for saying goodbye. The church was packed with people, former students and colleagues and friends, all come to pay their respects to a man who had made a difference in their lives. I sat in the front pew between my mother and Rebecca, listening to the eulogies and the music my father had chosen, and I felt hollowed out, empty, as if all my emotions had been scraped away, leaving nothing but a shell. At the cemetery, we stood under a canopy while the rain pattered on the fabric above our heads and the priest said final prayers. The smell of wet earth was strong, rich and loamy, and I watched as they lowered my father's casket into the ground. My mother dropped a single white rose onto the casket, her face composed but her eyes distant, and Rebecca and I followed suit. The sound of the roses hitting the wood was soft, almost gentle, and then it was over. People came back to the house afterward, filling the rooms with conversation and the clink of glasses and plates. I moved through the crowd on autopilot, accepting condolences and making small talk, all while wanting nothing more than for everyone to leave so I could finally breathe. My mother held court in the living room, gracious and composed, the perfect grieving widow, but I caught her glancing at the stairs several times with that same odd expression I had seen in the kitchen days before. By evening, the last of the guests had finally departed, and the three of us collapsed in the living room, exhausted and wrung out. The house was a mess, dishes everywhere, half-eaten food on every surface, but none of us had the energy to deal with it. We would clean tomorrow, or the day after, or whenever we could summon the will to care about such mundane things. "I should stay here tonight," Rebecca said, her voice thick with fatigue. "I do not want you to be alone, Mom." My mother smiled weakly and patted Rebecca's hand. "That would be nice, dear," she said. "I would appreciate the company." I felt a small pang of guilt that I had not offered first, but I also knew I needed to get back to my own house, to my own space, to try to process everything that had happened. "I will come by tomorrow," I said, standing up and stretching. "We can start going through Dad's things, figure out what needs to be done with the estate." My mother's face did that thing again, that flicker of something I could not name, and she nodded quickly. "Yes, of course," she said. "Tomorrow is fine." I drove home through dark streets, my mind replaying moments from the funeral, from the hospital, from the last few months of my father's illness. I kept thinking about the way my mother had looked at him in those final moments, the intensity of her gaze, and the strange expression she had been wearing ever since. I told myself it was just grief, that everyone processes loss differently, that I was reading too much into things because I was exhausted and emotionally drained. My house was dark and quiet when I arrived, and I was grateful for the solitude. I poured myself a generous glass of whiskey and sat in my living room in the dark, sipping slowly and letting the burn of the alcohol drown me. My phone buzzed with text messages from friends checking in, but I ignored them. I did not have the energy to respond, to reassure people that I was okay when I was not sure that was true. I must have fallen asleep on the couch, because I woke up with a stiff neck and early morning light streaming through the windows. My phone showed it was just past 7, and I had 3 missed calls from Rebecca. I called her back immediately, my heart racing with sudden anxiety. "What is wrong?" I asked as soon as she answered. "Is Mom okay?" Rebecca's voice was strange, tight and controlled in a way that set off alarm bells in my head. "You need to come over here," she said. "Right now. I found something, and you need to see it." She would not tell me what it was, just kept insisting I needed to come immediately, and the urgency in her tone had me grabbing my keys and heading out the door without even stopping to brush my teeth. I made the drive to my parents' house in record time, my mind spinning with possibilities. Had something happened to my mother? Had Rebecca found some hidden debt or financial problem? The house looked peaceful in the morning light, the lawn sparkling with dew, but I felt a sense of dread settling in my stomach as I pulled into the driveway. Rebecca opened the door before I could knock, her face pale and her eyes wide. She had clearly not slept, her hair was a mess, and she was still wearing the same clothes from yesterday. "Mom is still asleep," she whispered, pulling me inside and closing the door quietly. "Come upstairs. I need to show you something." I followed her up to my father's office, my sense of dread intensifying with each step. The room looked the same as it had when I had retrieved the estate folder, neat and orderly and smelling of my father. Rebecca went straight to the filing cabinet and pulled open the bottom drawer, the one I had not looked in before. "I could not sleep last night," she said, her voice shaking slightly. I kept thinking about Dad, about how organized he was, how he had everything planned out. And I remembered that when we were kids, he used to keep important documents in the bottom drawer of this cabinet. He said it was the safest place, that if there was ever a fire, the bottom drawer would be most protected. So I came up here, just to look, just to make sure we had not missed anything. She reached into the drawer and pulled out a folder, this one unmarked and significantly thinner than the estate planning folder. She handed it to me with trembling hands, and I noticed her eyes were filled with tears. "Open it," she said. "Just open it and read." I opened the folder, my hand suddenly clumsy, and found myself looking at another will. This one was dated 6 months earlier than the one we had found in the estate planning folder, but it was just as official looking, just as properly notarized and legal. I began to read, my eyes scanning the words, and I felt the floor drop out from under me. This will was different. Very different. In this version, my father had left specific instructions that were not in the later will. The house was to be sold, with the proceeds split 3 ways between my mother, Rebecca, and myself. His retirement accounts were to be divided equally among the 3 of us. There were specific bequests, items of sentimental value designated for Rebecca and me, things that had meaning and history. And there was a letter, attached to the will, written in my father's handwriting. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the paper as I read his words. To my children, the letter began, "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and I hope that your mother has shared this will with you as I requested. I have tried to be fair in dividing my estate, to ensure that you are both taken care of and that you have pieces of me to remember. I know your mother will be well provided for, but I want you both to have security as well. I love you more than words can express, and I am so proud of the people you have become." I looked up at Rebecca, my mind reeling. "This does not make sense," I said, my voice coming out hoarse. "Why would there be 2 wills? Why would the later one be so different?" Rebecca's face was hard, her jaw clenched, and I saw anger burning in her eyes alongside the tears. "I think Mom made him change it," she said, her voice low and bitter. "I think she convinced him to leave everything to her, to cut us out. And then she hid this will, the real will, the one that shows what he actually wanted." I felt sick, my stomach churning with a toxic mixture of disbelief and betrayal. "No," I said, shaking my head. "Mom would not do that. There has to be another explanation." But even as I said it, I was remembering the strange looks, the flickers of panic or guilt on my mother's face, the way she had been so quick to show us the estate planning folder but had never mentioned looking anywhere else. I thought about how she had been glancing at the stairs during the funeral reception, as if worried someone might go up to my father's office. "We need to talk to her," Rebecca said, her voice hard. "We need to ask her about this, right now." I wanted to argue, to say we should wait, should think this through, should consult a lawyer first. But Rebecca was already heading for the door, the original will clutched in her hand, and I had no choice but to follow. My mother was in the kitchen, making coffee, when we came downstairs. She was wearing her bathrobe, her hair uncombed, and she looked small and fragile in the morning light. She smiled when she saw us, a tired, sad smile, and said, "Good morning, I did not hear you come in." Then she saw the folder in Rebecca's hand, and her face went white. "What is that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rebecca slammed the folder down on the kitchen table, the sound sharp and accusatory in the quiet room. "You tell us," Rebecca said, her voice shaking with anger. "You tell us why we found a different will hidden in Dad's office, a will that is dated before the one you showed us, a will that leaves us something instead of giving you everything. My mother sank into a chair, her legs seeming to give out beneath her. Her hands were trembling, and she would not meet our eyes. I could see her mind working, see her trying to figure out what to say, how to explain. The silence stretched out, painful and heavy, and I felt my heart breaking as I watched her struggle. "Mom," I said, my voice gentler than Rebecca's but no less insistent, "you need to tell us what is going on. Why are there two wills? Did you know about this one?" She finally looked up at us, and I saw tears streaming down her face. Her mouth opened and closed several times before any words came out, and when they did, they were so quiet I had to strain to hear them. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I knew about it. Your father wrote that will when he was first diagnosed, when he thought he had more time. But things changed, and he decided to update it. The later will is the valid one, the one that reflects his final wishes." Rebecca made a sound of disbelief, almost a laugh, but with no humor in it. "That is a lie," she said flatly. "The letter attached to this will is dated just 2 months before he died. He wanted us to have this. He wanted things divided fairly." My mother's face crumpled, and she buried her face in her hands. The sound of her sobbing filled the kitchen, harsh and broken, and I felt torn between comforting her and demanding answers. I pulled out a chair and sat down across from her, my own hand shaking as I reached for the folder. "I need you to tell us the truth," I said, keeping my voice as steady as I could manage. "All of it. What really happened." My mother took several shuddering breaths, trying to compose herself, and when she finally looked up, her face was blotchy and swollen. What she said next changed everything. "Your father was having an affair," she said, the words coming out in a rush. "For years, he was having an affair with someone from his school, another teacher. I found out about it 2 years ago, and it nearly destroyed me. We went to counseling, he promised to end it, and I thought we were working through it. But then he got sick, and I found out he had never really ended it. She had been visiting him at the hospital when I was not there. Did you know that? The nurses told me. They thought she was a family friend. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. My father, my kind, patient, devoted father, had been unfaithful. It did not seem possible, did not fit with anything I knew about him." Rebecca had gone very still, her face frozen in shock. "Mom," I said slowly, "even if that is true, what does it have to do with the will?" My mother's laugh was bitter and harsh. "Everything," she said. "It has everything to do with the will. That first will, the one you found, he wrote it when he was still in contact with her. He was planning to leave me, did you know that? He was going to wait until after he died to hurt me one final time, by making sure I had to sell our home, had to split everything up, had to start over with nothing. The later will, the one I showed you, that is the one he wrote after I confronted him, after I made him see what he was doing to our family." "I do not believe you," Rebecca said, her voice cold. "Dad would not do that. He loved us, he loved this family. You are making this up to justify stealing our inheritance." My mother's eyes flashed with anger, and she stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I am not stealing anything," she snapped. "I am protecting what is mine, what I earned through 43 years of marriage, through putting up with his betrayal and his lies. You two have your whole lives ahead of you, good jobs, your own homes. I am 68 years old, and I have nothing except what your father left me." The kitchen felt too small, too hot, and I could feel sweat prickling along my spine despite the air conditioning. This could not be happening, could not be real. Just days ago we had been a normal family grieving a loss, and now everything was falling apart, every assumption I had ever made about my parents and their marriage crumbling to dust. "I need to see proof," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears. "If Dad was having an affair, if any of what you are saying is true, I need to see proof." My mother stared at me for a long moment, and I saw hurt flash across her face. "You do not believe me," she said quietly. "Your own mother, and you do not believe me." She turned and walked out of the kitchen, and I heard her footsteps on the stairs, heavy and slow. Rebecca and I sat in silence, neither of us knowing what to say or do. I felt like I was in a nightmare, like at any moment I would wake up and find that none of this was real. But the folder on the table was real, the wills were real, and my mother's tears had been real. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, my mother returned carrying a shoebox. She set it on the table with a thud and removed the lid. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written in my father's handwriting. There were also printed emails, text message screenshots, and photographs. My mother pulled out one of the photos and slid it across the table to me. It showed my father with a woman I did not recognize, both of them smiling, his arm around her shoulders. They were at a restaurant, sitting close together, and the way they were looking at each other made my stomach turn. "Her name is Patricia," my mother said, her voice flat and emotionless now, drained of all feeling. "She teaches English at the same school where your father worked. They met 15 years ago at a faculty meeting, and the affair started not long after. I found these letters hidden in his office 2 years ago, and when I confronted him, he admitted everything. He said he loved her, that he had loved her for years, but that he could not leave me because of you kids, because of his reputation, because of 1,000 different reasons." I picked up one of the letters, my hands numb, and began to read. The words swam before my eyes, declarations of love and longing, plans for a future together, apologies for not being brave enough to leave his marriage. It was my father's handwriting, his way of phrasing things, and I could not deny it was real. Rebecca was reading another letter, her face growing paler with each line. "When he got sick," my mother continued, "I thought maybe it would bring us closer, that facing death would make him realize what was important. But she kept coming around, kept calling, and I realized he had never really let her go. So yes, I asked him to change his will. I told him that if he truly wanted to make amends, if he truly wanted to show me that our marriage meant something, he needed to ensure I would be taken care of. And he did. He wrote the new will, and he told me the old one did not matter anymore." "But he kept it," Rebecca said, her voice barely audible. "He kept the old will, and he wrote that letter telling us to read it. That has to mean something." My mother's face hardened. "It means he was a coward who could not make a clean break from anything," she said. "It means he wanted to have it both ways, to appease me while still leaving a door open for you to question everything after he was gone. Well, I am not going to let him do that. The later will is the legal one, and that is what we are going to follow." I felt like I was drowning, like the walls were closing in and I could not get enough air. I stood up abruptly, needing to move, needing to get out of that kitchen with its suffocating tension. I walked to the window and stared out at the backyard, at the swing set my father had built when Rebecca and I were children, now rusted and overgrown with weeds. How had I not known? How had I missed all the signs that my parents' marriage was not what it seemed? "We need to talk to a lawyer," I said finally, not turning around. "We need to figure out which will is actually valid, what Dad's real intentions were. This is too big for us to sort out on our own. I heard my mother make a sound of protest, but Rebecca cut her off. He is right, she said. We need professional advice. This is not just about money, Mom. This is about understanding who Dad really was, what he really wanted. My mother was silent for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was small and defeated. Fine, she said. Call a lawyer. But I am telling you, the later will is the one that matters. That is the one he signed knowing he was dying, knowing it would be his final word on the subject. Everything else is just noise. I called our family lawyer that afternoon, a man named Richard Chin who had handled various legal matters for my parents over the years. He agreed to see us the next day, and the three of us drove to his office in tense silence. The office was in a modern building downtown, all glass and steel, and the air conditioning was so aggressive I felt goosebumps rise on my arms as soon as we entered. Richard was in his mid-50s, with graying hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He had known my father, had played golf with him occasionally, and I could see genuine sadness in his face when he offered his condolences. I am so sorry for your loss, he said, shaking each of our hands. Your father was a good man. I felt Rebecca stiffen beside me at those words, and I knew she was thinking the same thing I was. Had he been a good man? How could we know anymore? We sat in Richard's office, leather chairs arranged around a polished conference table, and I laid out both wills along with the letter my father had written. Richard put on his reading glasses and examined everything carefully, his face giving nothing away. The silence stretched out as he read, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic from the street below. Finally, he looked up and removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. This is complicated, he said, his voice measured and professional. Both wills appear to be properly executed and notarized. The question is going to be which one represents your father's true final wishes. The later will would typically take precedence, as it would be assumed to supersede any earlier versions. However, the letter attached to the earlier will could be argued to show his intent, especially if there is evidence of undue influence in the creation of the later will. Undue influence, my mother said sharply. There was no undue influence. My husband made his own decisions. Richard held up a hand in a placating gesture. I am not making accusations, he said gently. I am simply outlining the legal landscape. If this goes to probate court, which it very well might, a judge will need to determine which will should be honored. That determination will be based on evidence of your father's mental state, his intentions, and whether there was any coercion or manipulation involved in the creation of either document. How long would that take? I asked, my voice sounding hollow. Richard sighed. Months, possibly longer, he said. Probate disputes can be lengthy and expensive, and they can tear families apart. I would strongly encourage you to try to reach some kind of agreement among yourselves before going down that road. Perhaps a compromise, a way to honor both your father's desire to care for your mother and his apparent wish to leave something to his children. There is no compromise, my mother said, her voice hard. The later will is valid, and that is final. Rebecca leaned forward, her eyes blazing. You do not get to decide that, she said. Dad wanted us to have something, and you are trying to take it away from us. You are using his affair as an excuse to justify your greed. My mother's face flushed red, and she opened her mouth to respond, but Richard cut in before she could speak. Please, he said, his voice firm. This is exactly the kind of conflict that will make this situation worse. I understand emotions are running high, but you need to think carefully about what you want the outcome to be. Do you want to spend the next year fighting in court, airing your family's private matters in public, spending money on legal fees that could otherwise go to resolving this? Or do you want to find a way to move forward that honors your father's memory and preserves your relationships with each other? I do not know if we have relationships to preserve anymore, Rebecca said bitterly, and I felt the truth of those words like a knife to the chest. My mother made a small, wounded sound, and I saw tears begin to slide down her cheeks again. I felt torn in 1,000 directions, angry at my father for his betrayal and for leaving us with this mess, angry at my mother for hiding the first will and for her rigid refusal to compromise, angry at Rebecca for her harsh words even though I understood her pain, and angry at myself for not knowing, for not seeing what was happening in my own family. I think we need some time, I said finally. Time to process all of this, to think about what we want to do. Can we schedule another meeting in a week or two, after we have had a chance to cool down? Richard nodded, looking relieved. That is a wise idea, he said. Take some time, talk to each other, and think about what your father would have wanted, not just in terms of assets, but in terms of how his family treats each other after he is gone. We left the office separately, my mother getting into her own car and driving away without a word to either of us. Rebecca and I stood in the parking lot, the afternoon sun beating down on us, and I felt exhausted down to my bones. I cannot believe this is happening, Rebecca said, her voice thick with unshed tears. I cannot believe Dad did this to us, that Mom is doing this to us. Everything feels like a lie. I know, I said, because I did not know what else to say. I pulled her into a hug, and we stood there for a long moment, two siblings trying to hold each other up in the wreckage of our family. When we finally pulled apart, Rebecca wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. What are we going to do? She asked. I do not know, I admitted. But we will figure it out. We have to. Over the next week, I could not stop thinking about everything that had been revealed. I found myself going through my memories of my childhood, of family dinners and holidays and ordinary moments, trying to see if there had been signs I had missed. Had my parents been unhappy? Had there been tension I had been too young or too oblivious to notice? I called Rebecca several times, and we talked for hours, trying to make sense of it all, trying to reconcile the father we thought we knew with the man who had carried on a 15-year affair. I also found myself thinking about my mother, about what it must have been like to discover her husband's betrayal, to live with that knowledge for 2 years while trying to hold her marriage together. I tried to imagine the pain and humiliation she must have felt, the anger and hurt, and I felt my own anger at her begin to soften, just slightly. But then I would remember the way she had hidden the first will, the way she had been so quick to dismiss our claims, and the anger would flare up again. I decided I needed to talk to Patricia, the woman my father had been involved with. I needed to hear her side of the story, to understand what had really happened. It took some digging, but I found her contact information through the school district's website. I called her on a Tuesday evening, my heart pounding as the phone rang. She answered on the third ring, her voice cautious. Hello? This is Patricia. I took a deep breath and identified myself, and there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I have been wondering if one of you would call, she said. I am so sorry about your father. He was a wonderful man. I need to talk to you, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. I need to understand what happened between you and my dad. There was another pause, and then she said, "I think that is a conversation we should have in person. Can you meet me tomorrow? There is a coffee shop near the school, quiet and private. We can talk there." I agreed, and we set a time. I did not tell Rebecca or my mother about the meeting. I needed to do this on my own, to hear Patricia's story without anyone else's emotions clouding my judgment. The next day, I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early, my stomach churning with anxiety. The place was small and cozy, with mismatched furniture and the rich smell of roasted coffee beans. I ordered a black coffee I did not really want and sat at a table in the back corner, watching the door. Patricia arrived exactly on time. She was in her early 60s, with short gray hair and a kind face that showed the lines of a life well lived. She was attractive in an understated way, and I could see why my father might have been drawn to her. She ordered tea and joined me at the table, her hands wrapped around the cup as if seeking warmth despite the summer heat outside. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, her voice soft. "I know this must be incredibly difficult for you. I have been carrying so much guilt since your father passed. I wanted to come to the funeral, to pay my respects, but I knew it would not be appropriate." I did not know what to say to that, so I just nodded and waited for her to continue. "I loved your father," she said, looking down at her tea. "I know that is probably not what you want to hear, but it is the truth. We met 15 years ago, and there was an immediate connection between us. We tried to fight it, we really did, but eventually we could not deny what we felt. It was never meant to hurt anyone. We were just two people who found something special in each other." "But you did hurt people," I said, my voice harder than I intended. "You hurt my mother, you hurt my sister and me, even if we did not know it at the time. You were part of destroying my family." Patricia flinched as if I had struck her, and I saw tears well up in her eyes. "I know," she said. "I know, and I have to live with that. But I need you to understand that your father was not happy in his marriage. He had not been happy for a long time. He stayed because he felt obligated, because he did not want to hurt your mother or damage his reputation, but he was miserable." "That does not make it okay," I said. "If he was unhappy, he should have gotten a divorce, should have been honest instead of living a lie for 15 years. Patricia nodded slowly. "You are right," she said. "We both knew that. We talked about it constantly, about how we should end things, how he should be honest with your mother. But he was afraid. Afraid of losing you and your sister, afraid of what people would think, afraid of starting over at his age. So we stayed in this limbo, loving each other but unable to be together openly." "What about the wills?" I asked, leaning forward. "Did you know he had written one that left money to me and my sister? Did you know my mother made him change it?" Patricia looked confused. "I do not know anything about wills," she said. "Your father never discussed his estate planning with me. That was between him and your mother. But I do know that in the last few months of his life, he was very conflicted. He knew he was dying, and he was trying to make peace with everyone, trying to do right by all of us. It was tearing him apart." She reached into her purse and pulled out a letter, the envelope worn and creased as if it had been handled many times. "He wrote this to me a few weeks before he died," she said, sliding it across the table. "I think you should read it. It might help you understand where his head was." I took the letter with trembling hands and pulled out the pages inside. My father's handwriting, shaky now from illness, filled the paper. "My dearest Patricia," the letter began, "I am writing this because I need you to understand why I have made the decisions I have made. I am dying, and I know I do not have much time left, and I need to try to make things right with everyone I have hurt. I have hurt you by not being brave enough to leave my marriage and build a life with you. I have hurt my wife by betraying her trust and breaking my vows. And I have hurt my children by not being the man they thought I was. I have changed my will to leave everything to my wife. I know this is not what I originally planned, but I feel it is the right thing to do. She has given me 43 years of her life, and she deserves to be secure in her old age. My children are young and capable, and they will be fine without an inheritance from me. But I am also leaving the original will where they can find it, because I want them to know that I thought of them, that I wanted to provide for them. I know this is cowardly, leaving them to sort out the mess after I am gone, but I cannot face the confrontation while I am alive. I am too tired, too sick, too worn down by all the lies and secrets. I want you to know that loving you has been one of the great joys of my life, even though it was wrong, even though it caused so much pain. You made me feel alive in a way I had not felt in years, and I will carry that with me wherever I go next. Please do not blame yourself for any of this. The choices were mine, and I own them, for better or worse. I hope you can forgive me for not being strong enough to choose you openly, and I hope you can find happiness with someone who can give you what I could not. All my love, always. I read the letter twice, my vision blurring with tears. My father had been so conflicted, so torn between his obligations and his desires, and in the end he had tried to satisfy everyone and had satisfied no one. I felt a wave of sadness wash over me, sadness for him, for my mother, for Patricia, for Rebecca, and myself. We were all victims of his inability to make a clean choice, to be honest about what he wanted. He left the first will on purpose, I said slowly, the realization dawning on me. He wanted us to find it, wanted us to know he had thought about us, but he also wanted to give Mom everything. He was trying to have it both ways, even in death. Patricia nodded, wiping tears from her own eyes. That sounds like him, she said softly. Always trying to make everyone happy, never willing to disappoint anyone, even when it was impossible to do both. I sat back in my chair, feeling drained. What am I supposed to do with this information? I asked, more to myself than to her. How am I supposed to tell my mother and sister that Dad deliberately created this situation, that he wanted us to fight over his estate? Patricia reached across the table and touched my hand gently. Maybe you do not tell them, she said. Maybe you use this information to find a way forward that honors what he was trying to do, even if he did it badly. He wanted your mother to be secure, but he also wanted you to know you were loved and thought of. Maybe there is a way to accomplish both. I left the coffee shop with my head spinning, Patricia's words echoing in my mind. I drove aimlessly for a while, trying to process everything, trying to figure out what to do next. Finally, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of the cemetery where my father was buried. I had not been back since the funeral, had not been ready to face the reality of his grave, but now I felt drawn there. The cemetery was quiet, peaceful, with old trees providing shade and the sound of birds singing in the branches. I found my father's grave easily, the earth still fresh and dark, the temporary marker bearing his name and dates. I stood there for a long time, staring at the ground, trying to find words to say to him. Why did you do this? I finally said aloud, my voice breaking. Why could you not just be honest, just make a clear choice? You left us with this mess, and I do not know how to fix it. I do not know how to keep our family from falling apart. The only answer was the whisper of wind through the leaves and the distant sound of a lawnmower. I thought about my mother, about the pain she had endured, the betrayal she had lived with. I thought about Rebecca, angry and hurt and feeling cheated out of what she believed was rightfully hers. I thought about Patricia, loving a man who could never fully be hers, living in the shadows for 15 years. And I thought about my father, trapped by his own choices, unable to be honest with anyone including himself. I pulled out my phone and called Rebecca. When she answered, I said, "I need to talk to you and Mom. Together. Tonight. There is something I need to tell you both, and then we need to figure out how to move forward." Rebecca started to ask questions, but I cut her off. "Please," I said. "Just trust me. We need to do this." That evening, the three of us sat in my parents' living room, the same room where we had gathered after the funeral, where we had spent countless family evenings over the years. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife, and my mother and Rebecca sat as far apart as possible, neither looking at the other. I stood in front of them, feeling like I was about to jump off a cliff. "I met with Patricia today," I said, and both of them reacted immediately. My mother's face went white, and Rebecca leaned forward with interest. "Before you say anything," I continued, holding up my hand, "you need to hear what she told me. You need to read this letter Dad wrote to her." I pulled out the letter Patricia had given me and read it aloud, my voice steady despite the emotions churning inside me. When I finished, the silence in the room was absolute. My mother was crying silently, tears streaming down her face, and Rebecca looked stunned, her anger seeming to have drained away. I sat down and looked at both of them. "Dad created this situation deliberately," I said. "He wanted Mom to have everything, but he also wanted us to know he thought about us. He was too much of a coward to face the conflict while he was alive, so he left it for us to deal with. And now we have a choice. We can fight about this, drag it through court, tear our family apart even more than it already is. Or we can find a way to honor what he was trying to do, even though he did it in the worst possible way." Rebecca spoke first, her voice small and uncertain. "I do not know if I can just let this go," she said. "I am so angry at him, at both of them, at this whole situation. I feel like I do not know who my father was, and I do not know if I can trust Mom after she hid that first wolf from us." My mother flinched at those words, but she did not argue. "I know I have not handled this well," she said quietly. "I was so hurt, so angry, and I just wanted to protect myself. I thought if I could just make the second will the only will, I could pretend the first one never existed, could pretend your father had not been planning to force me to sell our home and start over. But I see now that was wrong. I should have been honest with you from the beginning." "What do you want, Mom?" I asked gently. "If you could have anything, what would it be?" She thought for a long moment, her hands twisting in her lap. "I want to stay in this house," she said finally. "This is my home, where I raised you kids, where I have 43 years of memories. I do not want to have to sell it and move somewhere smaller, somewhere that does not feel like mine. But I also do not want to lose you too. You are all I have left, and the thought of you hating me, of our family being destroyed, that is worse than any financial worry." "Rebecca," I said, turning to my sister, "what do you want?" She was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. "I want to feel like Dad loved us," she said finally. "I want to feel like we mattered to him, like we were not just an afterthought. And I want to understand why he did what he did, even if I can never forgive it." I looked between the two of them, these two women I loved, both hurting in different ways, both victims of my father's inability to be honest. "What if we compromise?" I said slowly, an idea forming in my mind. "What if Mom keeps the house and the majority of the estate, But Rebecca and I each get something meaningful, something that shows Dad thought about us. Not necessarily the amount specified in the first will, but enough that we feel acknowledged. And what if we all agree to try to move forward, to not let Dad's mistakes destroy what is left of our family? My mother looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "What did you have in mind?" she asked. I thought about the letter my father had written, about his desire to provide for everyone, and about what would be fair. "What if Rebecca and I each get $25,000 from the retirement accounts?" I said. "That leaves Mom with the vast majority of the money, enough to be comfortable and keep the house, but it gives us something tangible. And what if we each get to choose a few items from the house, things that have sentimental value, things we want to remember Dad by?" Rebecca looked skeptical. "That is a lot less than what the first will specified," she said. "I know," I replied. "But it is also a lot more than the second will gives us. And more importantly, it is a way for us to move forward without destroying each other. We can spend the next year fighting in court, spending money on lawyers, airing all of Dad's secrets in public. Or we can agree to this, sign papers making it legal, and try to heal." My mother was nodding slowly. "I think that is fair," she said. "I can live with that. Rebecca, what do you think?" My sister looked torn, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. Finally, she sighed. "Okay," she said. "Okay, I can agree to that. But I need you both to understand that I am still angry, still hurt, and it is going to take me a long time to get over this. I am agreeing to this compromise, but I am not saying everything is fine, because it is not." "I understand," I said, and I saw my mother nod as well. "We are not asking you to pretend everything is fine," I continued. "We are just asking you to give us a chance to rebuild, to find a way to be a family again, even if it is a different kind of family than we were before." We contacted Richard Chin the next day and explained our agreement. He drew up the necessary paperwork, and within 2 weeks, everything was signed and notarized. My mother would keep the house and the majority of the estate. Rebecca and I would each receive $25,000, and we would each choose items from the house that had meaning to us. The day we went through the house to select our items was bittersweet. Rebecca chose Dad's collection of vintage cameras, something he had been passionate about and had shared with her when she was younger. She also took his favorite reading chair, worn and comfortable, and a painting that had hung in his office for as long as I could remember. I chose his books, shelves and shelves of history texts and novels that he had collected over a lifetime. I also took his watch, the one he had worn every day, and a box of old photographs that documented our family history. My mother watched us go through the house, and I could see the pain in her eyes as we packed up pieces of my father's life. But she did not try to stop us, did not argue about our choices. When we were done, she made coffee and we sat in the kitchen, the three of us, and talked. Really talked, for the first time since my father's death. We talked about our memories of him, the good and the bad, the ways he had shaped us and the ways he had failed us. "I remember when I was 8, Rebecca said, and I wanted to quit piano lessons because they were too hard. Dad sat with me every night for a month, helping me practice, encouraging me, until I got past that rough patch. He was so patient, so supportive. I had forgotten about that until now." My mother smiled, a sad, wistful smile. "He was good at that," she said. "Good at being there for you kids, at making you feel like you could do anything. I think that is why his betrayal hurts so much, because he was capable of such love and devotion, but he could not give that to me, not fully." "I think he did love you, Mom," I said carefully. I think he was just broken in some way, unable to be satisfied with what he had, always looking for something more. That does not excuse what he did, but maybe it helps explain it. My mother shook her head slowly. I have spent 2 years trying to understand, she said. Trying to figure out what I did wrong, what I could have done differently. But I have come to realize that it was not about me. It was about him, about his own unhappiness and his inability to deal with it honestly. I can forgive him, eventually, but I will never understand it. We sat in silence for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Rebecca spoke up. I think we should go to therapy, she said. All of us, together. Family therapy, to help us work through all of this. I do not think we can do it on our own. I was surprised by the suggestion, but as I thought about it, I realized she was right. We needed help, professional help, to navigate the complicated emotions and damaged trust that my father's actions had created. My mother looked uncertain. I do not know, she said. I am not sure I want to air our family's problems to a stranger. But Rebecca was insistent. We need this, Mom, she said. We need someone who can help us communicate, who can give us tools to rebuild our relationships. Please, just try it. After a long moment, my mother nodded. Okay, she said. Okay, I will try. We found a family therapist who specialized in grief and betrayal, a woman named Dr. Sarah Martinez who had a warm, calming presence. The first session was awkward and painful, all of us struggling to articulate our feelings, to be vulnerable in front of each other and a stranger. But Dr. Martinez was patient and skilled, asking questions that helped us dig deeper, that helped us see each other's perspectives. Over the following months, we met with Dr. Martinez every 2 weeks. Slowly, painfully, we began to heal. We talked about our anger and our grief, about the ways my father's actions had damaged our trust in each other and in relationships in general. We talked about my mother's pain and humiliation, about Rebecca's feelings of betrayal, about my own struggle to reconcile the father I had known with the man he had actually been. One session, about 3 months in, Dr. Martinez asked us to talk about what we had learned from the experience. Rebecca spoke first. I have learned that people are complicated, she said. That someone can be a good father and a bad husband, that they can love you deeply and still hurt you terribly. I have learned that I need to let go of the idea that my parents were perfect, that their marriage was something to aspire to. They were just people, flawed and struggling like everyone else. My mother was next. I have learned that I cannot control everything, she said. I spent so much energy trying to hide what was happening, trying to present a perfect front to the world, and it nearly destroyed me. I have learned that I need to be honest, even when it is hard, even when it makes me vulnerable. And I have learned that my children are stronger than I gave them credit for, that they can handle the truth even when it is ugly. When it was my turn, I thought carefully about what I wanted to say. I have learned that secrets are poison, I said finally. That they eat away at relationships and trust, and that the truth, no matter how painful, is always better than a lie. I have learned that forgiveness is not about excusing what someone did, but about releasing yourself from the burden of anger and resentment. And I have learned that family is not just about blood, it is about choosing to show up for each other, even when it is hard, even when you are hurt and angry and do not know if you can ever trust again. Dr. Martinez smiled at us, and I could see approval in her eyes. You have all come so far, she said. When you first came to me, you could barely look at each other, could barely be in the same room without fighting. Now you are communicating, being honest about your feelings, working together to heal. That is not easy work, and you should be proud of yourselves." As the months passed, things slowly began to feel more normal. Rebecca and I started having regular dinners with our mother, awkward at first but gradually becoming more comfortable. We talked about everyday things, work and weather and plans for the holidays, but we also talked about Dad, sharing memories and slowly building a more complete, more honest picture of who he had been. I also stayed in touch with Patricia. I knew my mother and Rebecca would not understand, but I felt a strange kinship with her, this woman who had loved my father and been hurt by him in different ways than we had. We met for coffee occasionally, and she told me stories about my father I had never heard, showed me sides of him I had not known existed. It was painful but also illuminating, helping me understand him as a whole person rather than just as my father. One afternoon, about 6 months after my father's death, Patricia told me she was moving. "I am going to live with my sister in Oregon," she said. "I need a fresh start, somewhere that does not have memories of your father on every corner." "I understand," I said, and I meant it. "I hope you find happiness there. I hope you find peace." She smiled, a sad but genuine smile. "I hope the same for you," she said. "And for your family. Your father would be glad to know you are all working to stay together, despite everything." The first holiday season without my father was difficult. Thanksgiving felt wrong without him carving the turkey, without his terrible jokes and his insistence on going around the table to say what we were thankful for. But we got through it, the three of us, and we started new traditions, ways of honoring his memory while also acknowledging the complicated truth of who he had been. Christmas was even harder. The house was decorated the way my mother always decorated it, with lights and garland and the same ornaments we had used for decades. But the tree felt emptier somehow, the presents fewer, and the absence of my father was a physical presence in the room. We opened gifts and ate dinner and tried to be cheerful, but there was an underlying sadness that none of us could quite shake. That evening, after Rebecca had gone home and I was helping my mother clean up, she turned to me with tears in her eyes. "I miss him," she said simply. "Despite everything, despite the affair and the lies and all the pain, I miss him." "I know," I said, pulling her into a hug. "I miss him too." We stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, and I felt the weight of our shared grief and our shared determination to move forward. As the first anniversary of my father's death approached, we decided to do something to mark the occasion. We went to the cemetery together, the three of us, and we each brought something to leave at his grave. My mother brought flowers, white roses like the one she had dropped on his casket at the funeral. Rebecca brought a photograph, one of the two of them from when she was a little girl, him pushing her on a swing, both of them laughing. I brought a letter I had written, telling him everything I wished I could have said when he was alive. We stood at his grave in silence for a long time, each lost in our own thoughts and memories. Finally, my mother spoke. "I forgive you," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I forgive you for the affair, for the lies, for the pain you caused. I do not understand it, and I do not excuse it, but I forgive you. Because holding on to the anger is only hurting me, and I am tired of hurting. I want to remember the good times, the moments when we were happy, and I want to let go of the rest." Rebecca nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I forgive you too," she said. "For not being honest with us, for leaving us with this mess to sort out. I am still angry sometimes, and I still do not understand why you did what you did, but I am choosing to forgive you anyway. Because you were my dad, and you loved me, and that has to count for something." I felt my own tears start to fall as I added my voice to theirs. "I forgive you, Dad," I said. For being human, for being flawed, for making mistakes that hurt the people you loved. I wish you had been braver, wish you had been honest, but I understand that you were doing the best you could with who you were. And I choose to remember the good parts, the ways you shaped me and taught me and loved me, even if it was imperfect. We left the cemetery feeling lighter somehow, as if speaking those words of forgiveness had released something that had been weighing us down. The drive home was quiet but not uncomfortable, and when we got back to the house, my mother made tea and we sat in the living room, talking about memories of my father that made us laugh rather than cry. "Remember when he tried to teach us to fish," Rebecca said, "and he got his line tangled in a tree and fell in the lake trying to get it free?" We laughed at the memory, at the image of our dignified father soaking wet and covered in pond scum, laughing at himself even as he shivered. Or the time he decided to cook Thanksgiving dinner himself and burned the turkey so badly we had to order pizza, I added. He was so proud of himself right up until he opened the oven and smoke poured out. My mother smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "He was a terrible cook," she said. "But he always tried so hard, always wanted to help even when he had no idea what he was doing. That was one of the things I loved about him, his willingness to try new things even if he failed spectacularly." We spent the rest of the evening sharing stories, building a more complete picture of my father that included both his strengths and his weaknesses, his kindness and his betrayals, his love and his failures. In the months that followed, our family continued to heal. It was not a straight line. There were setbacks and arguments and days when old wounds felt fresh again. But we kept showing up for each other, kept going to therapy, kept choosing to work through the pain rather than letting it drive us apart. My mother started volunteering at the local library, finding purpose and community in helping others. Rebecca started dating again, something she had not done in years, and I could see her slowly opening herself up to the possibility of love and trust. I found myself thinking less about my father's betrayal and more about the lessons his life and death had taught me. I thought about the importance of honesty, of being brave enough to make hard choices rather than trying to please everyone. I thought about the damage that secrets can do, how they fester and grow until they poison everything they touch. And I thought about forgiveness, not as a one-time act but as an ongoing choice, a decision to release anger and resentment so they do not consume you. One evening, about 18 months after my father's death, I was having dinner with my mother when she said something that surprised me. "I have been thinking about selling the house," she said, her voice tentative. "I know I fought so hard to keep it, but now I am not sure it is what I want. It is so big, so full of memories both good and bad, and I think maybe I need a fresh start. Something smaller, somewhere I can build new memories without being haunted by the past." I looked at her, this woman who had been through so much, who had fought so hard to hold on to what she thought she needed, and I saw strength and wisdom in her face. "I think that is a good idea, Mom," I said. "I think you should do what feels right for you, not what you think you should do or what Dad would have wanted. This is your life now, and you get to decide how to live it." She smiled, and I saw relief in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for understanding." She sold the house 6 months later and moved into a cozy condo near the downtown area. It was bright and modern, with big windows and an open floor plan, and it suited her. Rebecca and I helped her move, packing up 43 years of life into boxes and deciding what to keep and what to let go. It was emotional work, saying goodbye to the house where we had grown up, but it also felt right, like we were all moving forward together. The day of the move, after everything was unpacked and arranged in the new place, the three of us sat on my mother's new couch and ordered pizza. "We are starting over," my mother said, raising her glass of wine and a toast. "All of us, in our own ways. To new beginnings, to honesty, and to family." Rebecca and I raised our glasses and echoed her words. To new beginnings. As I drove home that night, I thought about everything that had happened since my father's death. The discovery of the two wills, the revelation of his affair, the anger and pain and betrayal we had all felt. But I also thought about the healing, the hard work of forgiveness and rebuilding trust, the choice we had made to stay together as a family despite everything that had tried to tear us apart. I realized that my father's greatest gift to us, though he probably never intended it, was teaching us that love is not about perfection. It is about showing up, being honest, and choosing each other even when it is hard. He had failed at that in many ways, but his failure had taught us how to succeed. We had learned to communicate, to be vulnerable, to forgive without forgetting, and to build something new from the wreckage of what had been. I thought about the alternate will, the one that had started this whole journey, and I realized it did not matter anymore which one was legally valid or what my father's true intentions had been. What mattered was that we had found a way to honor everyone's needs, to be fair and compassionate, and to move forward together. We had taken a situation that could have destroyed us and used it to make us stronger. 2 years after my father's death, Rebecca got married. It was a small ceremony, just close friends and family, and she asked me to walk her down the aisle since Dad could not be there. As I stood with her in the back of the church, waiting for the music to start, she squeezed my hand and said, "I wish Dad could be here." "I know," I said. "But I think he would be proud of you, of the person you have become, of how you have handled everything." She smiled through her tears. "I hope so," she said. My mother sat in the front row, looking elegant in a blue dress, and I saw her wipe tears from her eyes as Rebecca walked past. After the ceremony, at the reception, the three of us found ourselves standing together, watching Rebecca dance with her new husband. "She looks so happy," my mother said softly. "She does," I agreed. "And she deserves it, after everything she has been through." My mother turned to look at me, and I saw something in her face I had not seen in a long time. Peace. "We have come a long way, have we not?" she said. "From that awful day in the hospital to here. I never thought we would make it, never thought we could get past all the pain and anger. But we did." "We did," I said, putting my arm around her shoulders. "Because we chose to. Because we decided that family was worth fighting for, even when it was hard." That night, lying in bed, I found myself thinking about my father again. I wondered what he would think if he could see us now, see how we had taken the mess he left behind and turned it into something stronger. I liked to think he would be proud, that he would see we had learned from his mistakes and become better people because of them. But I also knew that it did not really matter what he would think. What mattered was what we thought, how we felt about ourselves and each other, and the family we had chosen to rebuild. I thought about Patricia too, wondered if she had found happiness in Oregon, if she had been able to move on from her love for my father. I hoped she had found someone who could love her openly and honestly, without secrets or shame. She had been a victim of my father's inability to choose, just as we all had been, and she deserved peace and happiness as much as any of us. The years continued to pass, and our family continued to grow and change. My mother started dating again, something that surprised both Rebecca and me, but we supported her. She deserved companionship, deserved to be happy, and if she could find that with someone new, we were glad for her. Rebecca and her husband had a baby, a little girl they named Emma, and watching my mother hold her granddaughter for the first time, I saw joy on her face that I had not seen since before my father's illness. I became uncle, a role I took seriously, and I found myself thinking about what kind of example I wanted to set for Emma. I wanted to teach her about honesty and integrity, about the importance of making hard choices rather than taking the easy way out. I wanted her to learn from her grandfather's mistakes without being defined by them, to understand that people are complicated and flawed but still worthy of love. One day, when Emma was about 2 years old, she pointed at a photograph of my father that my mother kept on her mantel and asked who that was. "That is your grandpa," Rebecca told her. "He died before you were born, but he would have loved you very much." Emma studied the photograph with the serious expression that toddlers sometimes get, and then she said, "He looks nice." "He was," I said, and it was true. He had been nice, and kind, and loving. He had also been dishonest and cowardly and selfish. He had been human, in all the messy, complicated ways that humans are. As Emma grew older, I knew there would come a time when she would ask more questions about her grandfather, when she would want to know more than just that he was nice and that he died. And when that time came, we would tell her the truth, age-appropriate but honest. We would tell her that he was a good teacher and a loving father, but that he also made mistakes that hurt people. We would tell her that families are complicated, that people can love each other and still hurt each other, and that forgiveness is a choice we make not for the other person but for ourselves. 5 years after my father's death, on what would have been his 73rd birthday, the three of us went back to the cemetery. It had become a tradition of sorts, this annual visit, a way of marking time and acknowledging how far we had come. The grave marker was withered now, the flowers we had planted around it blooming in cheerful colors. We stood there in comfortable silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. "I have something to say," my mother announced suddenly. Rebecca and I looked at her in surprise, and she took a deep breath before continuing. "I want you both to know that I am sorry. Sorry for hiding that first will, sorry for not being honest with you from the beginning, sorry for letting my own pain and anger cloud my judgment. You deserved better from me, and I failed you. But I am grateful, so grateful, that you gave me a chance to make it right, that you did not give up on me or on our family." "Mom," Rebecca said, her voice thick with emotion, "you do not need to apologize anymore. We have all made mistakes, we have all done things we regret. What matters is that we worked through it, that we chose each other." My mother smiled through her tears and pulled us both into a hug. "I love you both so much," she said. "You are the best thing your father and I ever did, the one thing we got absolutely right." We left the cemetery that day feeling lighter, feeling like we had finally laid to rest not just my father's body but also the pain and anger and betrayal that had haunted us for so long. The drive back to my mother's condo was filled with laughter and conversation, plans for Emma's upcoming birthday party and discussions about where we should go for our next family vacation. We were not the same family we had been before my father's death, but we were a family nonetheless, bound together by choice and love and the hard work of forgiveness. That evening, I sat in my own home and pulled out the box of my father's books that I had taken from the house. I had not looked through them in years, had just kept them on a shelf as a reminder of him. But now I opened the box and began sorting through the volumes, running my fingers over the worn spines and faded covers. Tucked inside one of the books, a history of the Civil War that had been one of his favorites, I found a letter. It was addressed to me, in my father's handwriting, and it was dated just a week before he died. My hands shook as I opened it, wondering what he could possibly have to say to me, what final message he had left. The letter was short, just a single page, but every word felt heavy with meaning. "My dear son," it began, "I am writing this because I know I do not have much time left, and there are things I need to say to you that I have not had the courage to say in person. I have made so many mistakes in my life, hurt so many people I love, and I know that you will discover some of those mistakes after I am gone. I am sorry for that, sorry for the pain and confusion my choices will cause you and your sister and your mother. I want you to know that everything I did, every choice I made, came from a place of fear. Fear of disappointing people, fear of being alone, fear of facing hard truths about myself and my life. I thought I could make everyone happy, could have everything I wanted without hurting anyone, but I see now how foolish that was. You cannot live an honest life while keeping secrets, cannot love people fully while lying to them. I hope that you can learn from my mistakes, that you can be braver than I was, more honest, more willing to face difficult truths. I hope that you can forgive me, not because I deserve it, but because holding on to anger will only hurt you. And I hope that you will take care of your mother and your sister, that you will be the glue that holds our family together when I am no longer there to do it. You have always been my pride and joy, from the moment you were born. Watching you grow into the man you have become has been one of the greatest privileges of my life. You are kind and thoughtful and strong in ways I never was, and I know you will do great things. I love you more than I can express, and I am so sorry for the pain my choices will cause you. Please know that none of it was your fault, that you and Rebecca were the best parts of my life, the things I got right even when I got so much else wrong. With all my love, Dad. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face, and I felt a complicated mixture of emotions. Anger that he had known what he was doing would hurt us and had done it anyway. Sadness that he had been so trapped by his own fear and inability to be honest. But also love, because despite everything, he had been my father, and he had loved me in the imperfect way that humans love each other. And gratitude, because his mistakes had taught me valuable lessons about honesty and courage and the importance of making hard choices. I called Rebecca and read her the letter over the phone. When I finished, there was a long silence, and then I heard her sigh. "He knew," she said quietly. "He knew exactly what he was doing, what kind of mess he was leaving us with, and he did it anyway." "I know," I said. "But I think he also knew we would be okay, that we were strong enough to handle it." And he was right. We are okay. We are more than okay. "Do you forgive him?" Rebecca asked. I thought about the question, really thought about it, and realized that I did. "Yes," I said. "I forgive him. Not because what he did was okay, but because I do not want to carry the anger anymore. I want to remember the good parts, the ways he loved us and shaped us, and let go of the rest." Rebecca was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I think I do too. I think I have been forgiving him little by little over the past 5 years, and I am finally ready to let it all go." We talked for another hour, sharing memories and reflections, and by the time we hung up, I felt a sense of peace I had not felt in years. I carefully folded the letter and put it back in the book, a reminder of my father's humanity and his flaws, but also of his love. I would keep it, would maybe share it with Emma someday when she was old enough to understand, but for now it was enough to know that my father had tried, in his own imperfect way, to make things right. The next day, I called my mother and told her about the letter. She listened in silence, and when I finished, she said, "That sounds like him. Always trying to explain, to justify, to make people understand. But also genuinely sorry, genuinely wanting to do better even if he did not know how." "Do you think he loved her?" I asked, meaning Patricia. My mother thought for a long moment before answering. Yes, she said finally. I think he did love her, in his way. But I also think he loved me, and he loved you kids. He just did not know how to reconcile all those different loves, how to make choices that honored one without betraying the others. So he tried to have everything, and in the end he lost it all. I think we should reach out to Patricia, I said impulsively. Let her know that we are okay, that we have forgiven Dad and moved on. I think she deserves to know that. My mother was quiet for so long I thought she might have hung up. Then she said, "You are right. She was a victim of his choices too, and she deserves peace. If you want to contact her, I support that." I was surprised by her response, but also proud of her. It took strength and grace to extend compassion to the woman who had been her husband's lover, and I told her so. She laughed, a sound that was both sad and genuine. I have learned a lot over the past 5 years, she said. About forgiveness, about letting go, about the fact that holding on to anger only hurts me. If reaching out to Patricia can give her some peace, then it is the right thing to do. I tracked down Patricia's contact information through her sister in Oregon and sent her an email. I told her about the letter I had found, about the healing our family had gone through, and about our decision to forgive my father and move forward. I told her that we hoped she had found peace and happiness, and that we bore her no ill will. I did not expect a response, but 3 days later, one came. "Thank you," she wrote, "for reaching out and for your kindness. I have thought about you and your family so often over the past 5 years, wondered how you were doing, hoped you were okay. I am glad to hear that you have found a way to heal and move forward. I want you to know that I have carried tremendous guilt about my relationship with your father, about the pain it caused your mother and your family. I have been in therapy myself, working through my own issues with honesty and integrity, trying to understand why I made the choices I made. I have found some peace here in Oregon. I met someone, a good man who knows about my past and loves me anyway. We are taking things slowly, but I am hopeful about the future in a way I have not been in a long time. Your father taught me a lot, both good and bad. He taught me about passion and connection, but he also taught me about the damage that secrets can do, about the importance of being honest even when it is hard. I will always love him, in a way, but I have also let him go. I hope you and your family continue to heal and thrive. You are all in my thoughts." I shared the email with my mother and Rebecca, and we all agreed that it felt like a final piece of closure, a way of acknowledging that everyone involved in this complicated situation had been hurt and was trying to heal. Patricia was not a villain, just a person who had made choices that hurt others, just like my father, just like my mother in her own way, just like all of us at various points in our lives. 7 years after my father's death, my mother remarried. His name was David, a retired engineer she had met through her volunteer work at the library. He was kind and patient, with a gentle sense of humor, and he treated my mother with a respect and devotion that was beautiful to see. Rebecca and I both liked him, appreciated the way he made our mother happy without trying to replace our father or pretend the past had not happened. At the wedding, a small affair in my mother's condo with just close friends and family, I gave a toast. I talked about second chances and new beginnings, about the courage it takes to open your heart again after it has been broken. I talked about how proud I was of my mother, of the strength she had shown in rebuilding her life, and how happy I was that she had found someone to share it with. When I sat down, my mother came over and hugged me, tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for supporting me, for not judging me, for understanding that I deserve to be happy." Emma was 7 years old by then, a bright, curious child who asked endless questions about everything. She was the flower girl at the wedding, taking her role very seriously, and watching her scatter petals down the aisle with intense concentration made everyone smile. After the ceremony, she came up to me and asked, "Is Grandma going to forget Grandpa now that she has David?" I knelt down to her level and said, "No, sweetheart. You do not forget people you love just because you love someone new. Your heart just gets bigger to make room for more love." She thought about that for a moment, her little face serious, and then she nodded. "That is good," she said. "Because I like David, but I do not want Grandma to be sad about Grandpa." "She is not sad anymore," I told her. "She remembers Grandpa, the good parts and the hard parts, but she has made peace with it all. And now she gets to be happy with David, which is what Grandpa would have wanted for her." Emma seemed satisfied with that answer and ran off to play with the other children at the reception. Rebecca and I stood together, watching our mother dance with her new husband, and I felt a sense of contentment I had not felt in years. "We have come so far," Rebecca said, echoing my mother's words from years before. "From that horrible day when we found the second will to here. I never thought we would make it, never thought we could get past all the anger and hurt. But we did," I said. "Because we chose to. Because we decided that family was worth fighting for." 10 years after my father's death, I found myself back at the cemetery on a crisp autumn day. The leaves were turning brilliant shades of red and gold, and the air smelled of wood smoke and approaching winter. I had not been to visit in a while, life had gotten busy, but I felt drawn there on this particular day. I stood at my father's grave, looking at the marker that was now weathered and covered in moss, and I felt a strange sense of peace. "I have forgiven you," I said aloud, my voice carrying on the wind. "I have forgiven you for your mistakes, for your cowardice, for the pain you caused. But more than that, I have learned from you. I have learned to be honest, to make hard choices, to face difficult truths rather than hiding from them. I have learned that love is not about perfection, it is about showing up and being real and choosing people even when it is hard. So thank you, Dad, for teaching me those lessons, even if you taught them by showing me what not to do." I stood there for a while longer, remembering the good times and acknowledging the bad, and then I turned and walked back to my car. As I drove away from the cemetery, I thought about the journey our family had been on, the pain and anger and betrayal we had worked through, the forgiveness we had chosen, the healing we had fought for. It had not been easy, and there had been times when I thought we would not make it, when the damage seemed too great to repair. But we had made it. We had taken a situation that could have destroyed us and used it to make us stronger, more honest, more compassionate. We had learned that families are not defined by perfection but by the choice to keep showing up for each other, to keep working through the hard stuff, to keep loving even when it hurts. And we had learned that forgiveness is not a one-time act but an ongoing practice, a decision we make every day to release anger and resentment and choose peace instead. I thought about my mother, happy with David, finally at peace with her past and excited about her future. I thought about Rebecca, thriving in her marriage and her role as a mother, teaching Emma about love and honesty and the complexity of human relationships. And I thought about myself, carrying the lessons my father had taught me, both intentional and unintentional, and trying to live a life of integrity and courage. The alternate will that had started this whole journey seemed like a lifetime ago, a relic from a different era when we were different people. It did not matter anymore which will had been legally valid or what my father's true intentions had been. What mattered was that we had found a way to honor everyone's needs, to be fair and compassionate, and to move forward together. We had taken the mess my father left behind and transformed it into something beautiful, a family that was stronger and more honest and more loving than we had been before. As I pulled into my driveway, my phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Family dinner at Mom's this Sunday? David is making his famous lasagna." I smiled and typed back, "I will be there." I would always be there, would always show up for my family, because that is what we did now. We showed up, we were honest, we worked through the hard stuff, and we loved each other fiercely and imperfectly, just like my father had loved us. That Sunday, I sat around my mother's table with Rebecca and her family, with my mother and David, and I looked at the faces of the people I loved most in the world. We were not the family we had been 10 years ago, before my father's death and all the revelations that followed. We were something different, something that had been broken and put back together, and the cracks where we had been repaired were visible if you looked closely enough. But those cracks were not weaknesses, they were proof of our strength, evidence that we had survived something that could have destroyed us. We were like a piece of Japanese pottery that had been broken and repaired with gold, the kintsugi philosophy that treats breakage and repair as part of the object's history rather than something to disguise. Our family's history included betrayal and secrets and pain, but it also included forgiveness and healing and the choice to love each other anyway. Emma was telling a story about something that had happened at school, her hands gesturing wildly, and everyone was laughing. David was serving lasagna, making sure everyone had enough, and my mother was smiling in a way that lit up her whole face. Rebecca caught my eye across the table and raised her glass slightly, a silent acknowledgement of how far we had come, and I raised mine in return. This was what my father's legacy had become, not the affair or the hidden wills or the lies, but this. A family that had learned to be honest with each other, to forgive each other's flaws, to show up even when it was hard. A family that had taken the worst thing that could have happened to us and used it to become better, stronger, more loving. A family that understood that not everything is what it seems, that people are complicated and messy and capable of both great love and great harm, often at the same time. As I drove home that evening, full of good food and surrounded by the warmth of family, I thought about the letter my father had written me, the one I had found in his book. He had hoped I would learn from his mistakes, that I would be braver and more honest than he had been. And I had. We all had. We had taken his failures and turned them into lessons, his weaknesses into our strengths. I thought about Patricia, happy in Oregon with her new partner, finally free from the weight of secrets and guilt. I thought about my mother, who had every right to be bitter and angry but had chosen forgiveness and a new beginning instead. I thought about Rebecca, who had been so hurt and angry but had worked through it to become an amazing mother and wife. And I thought about myself, carrying forward the lessons I had learned, trying every day to live with integrity and courage. The alternate will, the one that had revealed so many secrets and caused so much pain, had ultimately been a gift. Not the gift my father intended, perhaps, but a gift nonetheless. It had forced us to confront hard truths, to have difficult conversations, to make choices about what kind of family we wanted to be. And we had chosen to be a family that valued honesty over comfort, that chose forgiveness over resentment, that showed up for each other even when it was hard. I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a moment, looking at my house, thinking about my life. I had learned so much from my father's death and the aftermath, lessons about love and loss and the importance of being true to yourself and others. I had learned that secrets are poison, that honesty is hard but necessary, that forgiveness is a gift you give yourself as much as the person you are forgiving. Most importantly, I had learned that family is not about being perfect. It is about being real, being present, being willing to work through the hard stuff together. It is about choosing each other, day after day, even when you are hurt or angry or disappointed. It is about loving imperfectly but persistently, about showing up and trying and forgiving and trying again. My father had not been perfect. He had been deeply flawed, had made choices that hurt the people he loved, had been too cowardly to face hard truths. But he had also been human, and in his humanity he had taught us valuable lessons, even if he taught them by showing us what not to do. He had loved us, imperfectly but genuinely, and that love had been real even if it coexisted with betrayal and lies. As I walked into my house, I felt grateful. Grateful for my family, for the journey we had been on together, for the healing we had fought for and achieved. Grateful for the lessons I had learned, painful as they were. Grateful for the opportunity to live differently than my father had, to make better choices, to be braver and more honest. The story of the alternate will, of my father's affair, of our family's near destruction and ultimate healing, had become part of our family mythology. It was a story we told, carefully and honestly, when Emma asked questions about her grandfather. It was a story that reminded us of where we had been and how far we had come. It was a story that taught us that not everything is what it seems, that people are complicated, that love and betrayal can coexist, and that forgiveness is always possible if you are willing to do the work. Years continued to pass, and life moved forward as it always does. Emma grew into a teenager, smart and thoughtful, with her grandfather's love of history and her grandmother's strength. Rebecca and her husband celebrated their 15th anniversary, a milestone that felt significant given everything they had weathered together. My mother and David traveled, volunteered, and built a life together that was peaceful and joyful. And I continued to carry the lessons my father had taught me, both intentional and unintentional, trying every day to live with integrity and courage. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, I would pull out the letter my father had written me and read it again. Each time I read it, I found something new, some nuance I had missed before, some deeper understanding of who he had been and what he had been trying to say. The letter was a reminder that people are complex, that they can be both good and bad, loving and hurtful, brave and cowardly, often all at the same time. I kept the letter in the same book where I had found it, my father's history of the Civil War, and sometimes I would flip through the pages, reading his notes in the margins, seeing his thoughts and reactions to the text. It was a way of staying connected to him, of remembering the parts of him that were good and valuable, while also acknowledging the parts that were flawed and harmful. One day, when Emma was 16, she asked me directly about her grandfather's affair. She had overheard something at a family gathering, a reference that had piqued her curiosity, and she wanted to know the truth. I sat her down and told her the whole story, not sparing any details but also not dwelling on the painful parts. I told her about the two wills, about Patricia, about the anger and hurt and eventual forgiveness. She listened intently, her face serious, and when I finished she was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "That must have been really hard for all of you." "It was," I said. "It was one of the hardest things we have ever been through. But it also taught us a lot, about honesty and forgiveness and what it means to be a family." She nodded slowly, processing the information. "I am glad you all worked through it," she said. "I am glad you did not let it destroy you." "I am too," I said. "And I hope you can learn from it, learn to be honest in your own relationships, to make hard choices rather than trying to please everyone, to face difficult truths rather than hiding from them." Emma smiled, a wise smile that made her look older than her years. "I will try," she said. "I will definitely try." That conversation with Emma felt like another piece of closure, another way of transforming my father's mistakes into something valuable. By sharing the story with the next generation, by being honest about what had happened and what we had learned, we were ensuring that the lessons would continue, that the pain would not be wasted. 15 years after my father's death, I found myself thinking about him less often, but when I did, it was with a sense of peace rather than anger or pain. I had truly forgiven him, had let go of the resentment and hurt, and what remained was a complicated love for a complicated man. He had been my father, had shaped me in countless ways, both good and bad, and I was grateful for the lessons he had taught me, even the painful ones. I thought about the alternate will sometimes, about how it had been the catalyst for so much pain but also so much growth. Without it, we might never have learned the truth about my father's affair, might never have been forced to confront the reality of who he was. We might have gone on believing the comfortable lie, never knowing that our family was built on secrets and betrayal. And while the truth had been painful, it had also been liberating, allowing us to build something new and more honest in its place. The family dinners continued, a regular tradition that anchored us all. We gathered at my mother's condo, or at Rebecca's house, or sometimes at my place, and we shared meals and stories and laughter. We talked about our lives, our challenges, our triumphs, and we supported each other through it all. We had become the kind of family that could weather anything, because we had already weathered the worst and come out stronger. My mother, now in her 80s, was still sharp and engaged, still volunteering and traveling with David. She had made peace with her past, had forgiven my father and herself, and had built a life that was rich and fulfilling. Watching her, I was reminded that it is never too late to start over, never too late to choose happiness and forgiveness and a new beginning. Rebecca had become a therapist herself, inspired by our family's experience with Dr. Martinez. She specialized in helping families navigate betrayal and loss, using her own story to connect with her clients and give them hope. She was good at it, compassionate and insightful, and I was proud of the way she had taken her pain and transformed it into a way of helping others. As for me, I had learned to live with complexity, to accept that people are not all good or all bad but somewhere in between. I had learned to forgive without forgetting, to love without illusions, to be honest even when it was hard. I had learned that family is not about perfection but about persistence, about showing up day after day and choosing each other even when it would be easier to walk away. 20 years after my father's death, I stood at his grave one final time. I was older now, grayer, with my own share of regrets and mistakes. But I was also wiser, more compassionate, more understanding of human frailty. I looked at the marker, withered and worn, and I felt nothing but peace. "Thank you," I said quietly. "Thank you for the lessons, for the love, for the mistakes that taught me how to live better. Thank you for being human, for being flawed, for showing me that it is possible to be both good and bad, to love and to hurt, to fail and to be forgiven. I hope you found peace, wherever you are. I hope you know that we are okay, that we survived, that we even thrived. I hope you know that we forgave you, and that we carry your memory with love, even as we acknowledge your failures." I turned and walked away from the grave, feeling lighter than I had in years. The story of the alternate will, of my father's betrayal, of our family's journey through pain to healing, was complete. It was a story that had shaped us all, that had taught us valuable lessons about honesty and forgiveness and the complexity of love. It was a story that would be passed down to Emma and her children, a reminder that families can survive anything if they choose to, that forgiveness is always possible, and that not everything is what it seems. As I drove away from the cemetery for the last time, I thought about all the years that had passed, all the pain and healing, all the growth and change. I thought about my mother, happy and at peace. I thought about Rebecca, using her experience to help others. I thought about Emma, growing up with the wisdom of our family's story to guide her. And I thought about myself, carrying forward the lessons my father had taught me, trying every day to live with integrity and courage and compassion. The alternate will had been hidden, but it had been found. The secrets had been kept, but they had been revealed. The family had been broken, but it had been repaired. And in the end, we had learned that love is not about perfection, it is about persistence. It is about choosing each other, day after day, even when it is hard. It is about forgiving the unforgivable, about healing the unhealable, about building something beautiful from the wreckage of what was. Not everything is what it seems. People are complicated, families are messy, and love is imperfect. But if you are willing to do the work, if you are willing to be honest and vulnerable and forgiving, if you are willing to show up even when it hurts, then healing is possible. Growth is possible. Love is possible. And that, in the end, is what my father's legacy became. Not the affair or the lies or the hidden will, but the lesson that even the deepest wounds can heal if you choose to let them.